figuring out that balance of like being in development mode versus being in kind of growth mode. It's tough, but I think over time, like that, being able to be a small startup and making small tweaks to the model and seeing what sticks helps, right? So we're still figuring that out. I don't think we're anywhere close to figuring out or having figured out our product market fit. You know,
Okay, Nima, welcome back on. How you doing?
Thank you, Ravi. Thanks for having me. Doing great. How are you?
Good. You're one of the OGs. Yeah, you were with us when we had a physical podcast set. Now you're back on to the virtual.
Yeah, yeah. I remember it was I think it was like October 2018, if I'm not mistaken, when
Yeah,
I
yeah,
joined. Yeah, it was cool setup you guys had with the lights and everything. It was pretty nice. But this is cool too, with what's going on and everything. This is, I think, much better than nothing at least.
yeah. You're absolutely right. Like after the pandemic hit and we were forced to go to virtual, like legit the weekend, like the Monday, like in March of 2020 was when the pandemic was called. The
Yep,
weekend of, we had five really good guests lined up on our physical set, and we made the
I see.
call last minute on like Friday to be like, let's just cancel. Like it doesn't look too good. We're getting all these reports from across the world, and then the weekend, the pandemic was officially called, and the
Yep.
Monday of, the pandemic, like the Canada went into like a declared official pandemic, and it was crazy, right? Like I mean, it's been a year since then, more than a
I
year
know.
now.
Yeah, it felt like a lot longer. It's been a
Yeah,
crazy year, and yeah, I mean, like I think like one of the biggest things I miss is the physical events and everything that we used to go to, and we used to like take them for granted, like all these networking events and everything. We got to meet cool people, and I mean the virtual stuff is cool too, but of course it's not the same, right? So.
yeah. What have you been doing to make up for the networking events? No longer going and meeting anybody. How you navigating?
Yeah, lately I've been using Clubhouse a lot, and I think I see you there as well. So I'm trying to use that, and it's kind of like pretty hype right now. A lot of people are on it, right? So there's lots of cool rooms, from everything entrepreneurship to just like, even like stand-up comedies and stuff.
Yep.
So I try to join like quite a kind of variety of rooms and see, if it's quite if it's the same as a networking event. It's not quite the same, right? Of course, as you don't get that physical kind of face to face, but still, you get to meet cool people and learn more about their business or their life story, and that's kind of what I do these days, and to kind of, I guess, try to socialize a little bit. Yeah. What about you?
Yeah. Luckily, we have this podcast, and like you said, Clubhouse.
Yeah.
That's been majority of the way of getting around it. Like immediately, like this is that I went in a problem solving mode. When the pandemic's called, like how are we gonna meet people? Like one, our episodes we can't even do physically. We had to do virtually. We got to figure out how to do it virtually. But secondarily, we met everybody at events. We met
Right.
you at an
Exactly.
event, right? Like
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
right, and that's how the innovation industry kind of worked. There's these big events, there's these small events, there's these events
Exactly.
that you only know about because you know somebody, but like you go to these places and you physically meet people and then you take the conversation offline. Now it's completely
Exactly.
flipped. Now you're meeting
Yeah.
people completely virtual. And it's like, how do you meaningfully do that, right? Because the whole point of going to an event is like you don't know who you're meeting, but you know it's themed around, and this whole spontaneity around it. Now it's like, okay,
Exactly.
I'm searching for people, but problem is I don't know who. Sometimes like you don't know who you're searching for.
Exactly.
The
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
meeting random people sometimes like sparks and say like, oh, you know what, like this could be interesting. We work on this or thinking about that, or that randomness is definitely helps out. So how do we do that in a virtual environment? You know,
Yeah. It's a
Clubhouse, I
tough
think the
one. I mean.
closest thing.
Exactly, yeah. So at least like when people kind of hold rooms and they have some sort of topic that people with similar mindsets at least come together, you kind of get that feeling, but it's still, as you say, kind of different. I think like one thing, like for example, I see on Clubhouse that I don't see, or we don't see in like the real world, is the fact that everyone's in one room, right? So like at a networking event, typically people are in like small groups, kind of all over the room. Whereas like with Clubhouse, we see this one giant room sometimes, right, with like lots of people. And so I guess that part of it makes it more tricky to kind of connect with more individuals because, you can't really go small group to small group. You have to like talk in front of the whole big audience sometimes, and so
Yeah.
um, that there's a bit of a challenge that I've noticed there too. But again, still something better than nothing, right? You still get to meet a few people and like, again, as you said, like meet online and then possibly in the future you meet them offline, right? So yeah, everything's flipped.
Yeah, man. Like talking about that, right? Like I remember like Collision conference, right? I think we ran it, bumped into each other in Collision 2019, and like these big conferences were like the epitome of tech, right? You can go there and meet and like see these like these great speakers talk and like be inspired by them. You can bump into people randomly. You can exhibit conferences like these things usually way of growth, usually growth vehicles, right? You meet partners, you meet potential people you can work with or hire or work with you or work through you, right? Like all these partnerships kind of come into effect, and like I've been kind of trying to figure out how do we replicate that, right? So
Yeah,
I'd love to hear more about ShiftRide because you came in and introduced ShiftRide on the previous episode. We have had many people come back and do regular episodes, but I always enjoyed that almost more than the first one because like now we kind of already know, the story of where you came from. Let's figure
for
out
sure.
where you're going. I'm just putting up do not disturb mode on my phone. I usually do that
Okay,
in the
sounds
beginning,
good.
but I forgot. But
All good.
I love to jump into the growth of ShiftRide and how you guys been navigating this situation, right? So
For sure.
what's the latest and the greatest, man?
Yeah, yeah. So I think last time we talked about like, or we talked was, our next strategy was like, how do we get to Toronto, the Toronto market, right? So we were just in Waterloo. We had a couple cars there, and people were using them for their regular kind of daily trips around town, for groceries, shopping, going out with friends, and all that. And so, and of course, we saw how kind of the pandemic shifted all of that, and everyone went online. A lot of the grocery shopping became online. Malls started getting closed and very limited. So throughout that, we kind of noticed a bit of a pattern in terms of like the use cases change. More people were kind of looking to use us to either do work or do other stuff that might not be related to shopping or groceries or things like that. It was more of like we saw this kind of trend of people wanting to keep the card longer and use it more, especially in a time where they didn't know like what's going to happen, maybe like the day after everything else closes again. So people were looking for something more stable, more longer term, and so we kind of like noticed that. And but kind of to backtrack a little bit, since then we're looking to bring ShiftRide to Toronto with the same model that we had. But of course, once the pandemic hit, we were like, okay, let's kind of tweak the model. Can we do something longer term? Can we do like daily, potentially even weekly? And so we kind of actually got into the more of a longer term solution. So we became a weekly kind of subscription to cars. So you'd subscribe it to a car. It's still a marketplace, so we still have cars that other people list, or even rental companies and people who do this commercially. And we actually have people who, on the other end, they don't own a car, but yet they want to use one and they don't want to buy or lease one. This is a perfect solution because they get one week by week, and if their needs change, they can switch to an SUV, let's say, and then in the summer they can switch to like a convertible. So we kind of figured out that this is a cool model that might actually fit better into the current situation, even longer term. Um,
Mm.
so yeah, we kind of took a bit of a pivot, and we actually launched in Toronto last November. So we've been here since then, and we still have cars in Waterloo, but more of the traffic is coming in Toronto. So it definitely took longer than we expected, but we're still happy that we're here and we're growing within the Toronto area, and now we're kind of again going through that other phase of okay, what's next? Like, do we keep expanding here? Do we go to other provinces? What's that going to look like? So yeah, that's kind of like where we're at.
Really cool. I love this because like the sharing economy has been talked about for about half a decade now, and the concepts are still not fully ingrained into us, right? The idea of like limiting ownership and more like communal assets, combined through technology. Uber kind of like made it more widespread with like the on-demand mobile experience, right? Like a mobility experience, right? But what you're talking about is a little bit of a blended structure. It's like, okay, I not only have on-demand mobile mobility, but I can also hold on to that asset, hold on to that vehicle for like a week at a time, right? So it allows you to have this kind of mobility, but over an extended period of time, like a almost like a short-term rental of vehicles. Um,
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah,
So
like we
go ahead.
kind of compare ourselves with like a short-term lease, kind of like that's kind of like what the model is. And as you said, like it's been interesting because people some like we've seen people come subscribe to like for a week or for 2 weeks, and then all of a sudden they realize the service is so useful that they actually stay subscribed for months at a time. So it's been interesting to see kind of how the usage is and um, how people use it. Yeah.
Mm, really cool. So, going back to that like subscription model, right? Like, I think it was Porsche, and then I think later on Mercedes. I think we talked about this as well on our first episode, but
I
they
think so.
made a
Yeah.
subscription model for their vehicles, right? So instead of like leasing a car or financing it, you could pay a subscription and get access to a fleet. And anytime you wanted to bring back a car and take another one out, or like within a certain class of vehicles. Is that
Exactly.
something that's and I think we talked a little bit about this. Is something comparable to this? Could there ever be a point where we can just pay ShiftRide a subscription, and you're gonna get access to a whole tier, a level tier of vehicles? Pay an EV tier, and I can get access to EV vehicles anytime I need to,
Exactly.
or go into like, because one of the main things driving this aspect is car ownership is very expensive. Buying a
Mhm.
car, maintaining it, keeping it somewhere, from parking to like storage, and then like all the things you need to do for it, plus insurance, all those kind of stuff really eat it up. So there's been a lot of moves recently to like part ways with this type of product, right? Not having to own it yourself.
100%, yeah. And I think like I mean, you touched on Uber and like the mobility sector, and I still think there's a huge like market demand for private car ownership, right? So that's where we're trying to bridge that gap with the subscription service. Like, can we make it so that people have that convenience or that flexibility of an Uber type model where they don't have to buy a car, but they can use one, and yet have kind of a private ownership or some sort of ownership, right? It's more of like a short-term lease again, right? So you don't actually own the car, but you own that time with the car. So yeah, I think like we've seen that kind of interest in longer term, and we're even looking at like possibly even longer term than that. Um, so yeah, there's definitely something that we see there. And when we launched originally, like we didn't know if it's gonna work, and we had one guy take the car for like a month, and they actually enjoyed using it, and we thought, okay, there might be something there, and that's kind of how it got started. It was kind of a pilot, didn't even know we're gonna actually do this, um, and yeah, but we're happy because this model is a little bit more scalable, and as you said, like car ownership comes with all those different aspects, and so when we package them all together into a subscription service, it becomes easier. And I think, going back to your question, like, will ShiftRide get to that level? That's what we're trying to get to. Like, of course, there's programs like I think it's called Porsche Passport, or maybe they renamed it.
Mm,
But yeah, and I think Volvo has one too. But with them, I think still a lot of the end goal is to eventually sell a car to that customer. Which is also an interesting model, right? To get them kind of I guess
yeah.
comfortable with it behind a Porsche, and then eventually make a sale out of that.
Mhm.
I think like that's kind of the end goal for
Try it till you
when it
buy
comes
it
to
kind of
the
model. Yeah.
exactly, yeah. So that's where the OEMs come from where what I've seen, and some of them can be really really pricey too. Like I've seen like prices in the $2,000 ranges, but of course they come with like insurance and everything, right? So yeah, and at least everything's bundled together, so you don't have to worry about each individual piece, and maintenances and everything's included. So I think yeah, eventually like that might help us bridge that gap between
Yeah.
getting your ride, private ownership, and then eventually self-driving cars and everything. So yeah.
I mean, is there something you can do now? Like, imagine going to dealerships, like used car dealerships, to even like the OEMs right now that don't have these kind of programs. Like, hey, sell them like enterprise, be like an enterprise partnership, and like, hey, look, this is our capabilities. Look what we can do, right?
Mhm.
Why don't you try a passport program? Try to they buy
Exactly.
kind of program, right? Like, imagine that becomes experience, right? Because I think user experience when it comes to vehicles is definitely shifting, especially with people's mindsets. They're no longer making like $30,000, $50,000 vehicle decisions like on the fly anymore. They want to take their time and make that estimation, but they're willing to spend more. I think the
Yeah,
market is like segmenting. The people who are buying like more premium vehicles, whereas people in the aggregate that are buying less. Interesting enough, like I think 2020, they said because of the pandemic, the car price is going to go down, but it's actually a record high of people who went out and
yeah,
bought vehicles because
yeah,
they don't want to be dependent on other people anymore, or like other factors came into it, right?
yeah. It
Um,
was interesting.
yeah, like what do the shifts in the market look like on your half? Like, did any interest in your platform spike? What happened?
Yeah, so I think that was partially the reason why we saw longer term, you like people coming to use the car longer term. So I think people wanted to have that flexibility and the control
Mm,
of their car, especially like with a public transit, like probably wasn't the best time to use the public transit system. So um, people wanted to turn more towards that private ownership or transportation sector. And so yeah, a lot of people, like even personally, I know that bought their car in 2020. And so it was interesting for us, like I mean, in terms of like the graph, like we saw a huge dip around the March, April timeframe where the first lockdowns hit. But after that, I mean, things kind of evened out and
mm,
kind of got back to maybe not normal, but just slightly below what was normal for, let's say, like summer 2020 versus summer 2019. But of course, it still isn't the same, and so that's kind of why we decided to make that pivot because we saw a couple of people use a longer term, and when we ran a few surveys within our customers, we noticed that kind of convenience factor that comes with having that car and not having to be worried about returning it, very quickly, and knowing that you have it at least for a week. You can do a lot in a week with the car. You can run your errands, go visit your parents or whatever the use case is for that individual. We saw that they like that sort of model, and then yet it comes with the flexibility of if, like, let's say a week down the road you decide you don't want it anymore, that's totally okay. You don't have to commit to it, and I think that kind of model fits better for especially
mm.
like people who are just getting into using a car. This is their first experience with a car. They're not sure about buying one or leasing one, and they like they like the idea of owning a car, but of course, like this helps them get into the market. So totally, at some point, it could be a thing where we could be that gap between, like, let's say buying a car and actually just getting, let's say, rides in a car, right? So that kind of gap between those two markets.
Wow, yeah. So, speaking about that, like, is there any numbers you can share? How many cars you have on your platform, daily active users, anything like that?
For sure, yeah. So like right now, in terms of like subscribers, I think we're close to about like 40, 50 kind of monthly active subscribers, maybe slightly below that. But in terms of cars, I think we listed slightly over 120 in Toronto.
Wow.
Yeah, but yeah, the list of cars definitely, like, or the onboarding of the cars improved since our previous model, and the main reason being the location factor. So
Mm,
before we were partnering up with buildings, like property management companies, to place these cars in that specific location, and then you touched on that point too, that parking is not cheap, and then not only that, but finding the right parking was really challenging for that, right? So getting people to come back and finding the right places to place these car or buildings to place these cars was challenging, right? So and that kind of like blocked our ability to scale faster. Right now, the location doesn't matter as much. A lot of the car providers allow delivery options, or they're in pretty good locations, and someone is willing to travel, let's say 5, 10 kilometers to get a car that they're going to use for a week at least.
mhm.
So the location factor is not as a huge blocking, or I guess like challenge anymore.
Cool. That's really cool insights. I mean, I'm glad to. I've seen this full cycle. When you came on, I think you were like pre-launch. You're getting ready and getting things going. So, what are your learning curves like? So since the past 2 years since you came on, what have you learned and what are you expanding on?
For sure. So I think the last time I came on, I think I was still working on my own. So that was a bit of a challenge, for sure, because I was doing everything all myself, right? And I was more like I was really working hard to like maintain the platform, at the same time try to grow it, and at the same time try to raise capital. So at some point, I figured I can't do everything all on my own. So I actually brought on my co-founder who helped start the company back in 2016, 17. So actually, they took a bit of a break from the company, but they came back on, and we partnered up again last year. So and that really helped a lot, right? So throughout that kind of the learning curve is that definitely get someone on board who you can kind of share the load of the work, especially early on when there's so much to do and you're trying to grow at the same time. Make sure your platform, you got a product going and you got customer support and all these small pieces that are, that need to be in place. So that, yeah, I think like team was one of the, or making sure that there's some sort of a team was like one of the key factors that I learned, especially throughout this kind of pandemic and everything. Um, yeah, I think that was like the biggest kind of learning. Other than that, I mean, we it I mean we knew this before. It always takes longer than you think, right? So like I think last time we talked, um, first time I was on the podcast, I thought we're going to be in Toronto in a couple months, at that point, and of course it didn't happen. It wasn't that fast, right? So it took some time, and so I think like sometimes you got to be like a little bit more realistic and try to set like reasonable expect or goals for yourself, which is hard, especially like when you're a product person and you want to put together product and you set timelines for the product, and it's very similar with the product development too. It never takes, like they say that it takes three times as long as you actually, or as you think it will take to actually complete a product. And I think it's pretty true, like from what I've seen in the past few, products and apps I've worked on. So something, yeah, I think that's kind of like been my main kind of learning, I guess, throughout the past year. Another cool thing that happened, which is not related to ShiftRide, but I've always wanted to teach design online. So I think back in 2015, I started filming a few lectures of this software called Sketch, which helps people design, whether it's user interfaces or anything really of that nature. And I actually started filming a couple videos because I saw other people teaching online. I thought this would be something cool to try. And then I never actually ended up finishing that course or putting it together. So throughout the pandemic, that gave me, the whole lockdown kind of helped in the sense that I was at home more. So I was trying to come up with something that I could do, and it would be fun. And turned out that making that course was actually one of them. And so I actually put together a course on how to like design a complete UI UX in the software Figma, so which is a free design platform. So yeah, I put that together, and I think it was almost exactly a year ago, just when the pandemic was like probably a month in, and yeah. So that was also something exciting and new that I didn't expect to do, and ended up happening. So sorry, I can't hear you. I don't know if it's on your end or mine.
Oh, that
Okay.
was me. Sorry about that.
Okay.
So,
No, it's all good.
so I was saying, I think that I mean that's a interesting skill to get, right? Like the because of the internet, there's new ways of sharing information and teaching people. Back
For
before you
sure.
had to, giving a lecture was like you had to pull people into a room or maybe write a book and then try to sell that book off to people, right?
Yeah.
But now you can like upload a video or a series of videos, right? And really captivate an audience about something that you've learned a skill, and then sell that off. So was that meant to be like a income generator, like something that you wanted to put out there, or was it meant to be a self challenge for yourself to be like, can I show these skills off that I have? Like, can I condense knowledge into shareable tidbits? Like, where was the motivation for that?
Honestly, it was a bit of both. Like the income part was great, but I didn't have any expectation. I thought, I'm just gonna put this course, like I'm gonna put it together because the first step was that, when I started making that first course, when I had initially the idea back in 2015, I always kind of went through these years thinking, oh, like what could have happened if I finished and just put up that course, maybe I would have gotten a couple of students from it. So I guess that whole like mindset of like wanting to finish something you started was there, and that really kind of motivated me. And then once I published it, again, I wasn't sure what to expect and if I have to go and do a lot of marketing for it. But it turned out that the course slowly picked up on its own, and I listed it on Udemy and Skillshare, which is where it's available right now, and it kind of picked up on its own without much
Hmm.
marketing on my end. So that was interesting to see. So um, and I saw a lot of students kind of enjoy it. A lot of people reached out to me saying that this course helped them, kind of get the design job they wanted, or get the, even senior level designers who wanted to get into Figma, that software, but they didn't know how to do it, and they went through this course. So it was interesting to see these kind of reviews and feedbacks coming from people, and but yeah, I went in with no expectation, and just turned out to be a pretty good decision. I'm working on the side, like on the weekends and everything, to put together a second course right now. So, but it's definitely more challenging because now we're trying to like we're in kind of growth mode at the same time. I'm doing that, so it's and making a course is like you got to put a ton of hours into kind of editing, filming, editing, right? So, I guess much like a podcast, right? So it goes like there's a lot of work that goes into it that you don't realize it at first, and then once you get into it, you're like, wow.
Yeah. What was the feedback like for the coast for the course? Sorry.
Like in terms of like people like leaving reviews and stuff, right? So like every once in a while I read the reviews just to see like why people took the course, how did it help them. Um, and it was, yeah, it's been interesting because like there's a wide variety of people. Some people are just getting into design. Some people have been designing for 20 years, and they're just looking to learn a new software. Like let's say their company decided to use Figma, and then now they need to learn Figma. So a lot of kind of people like that took the course. So yeah, a wide variety of kind of students came in and took the course. So that was interesting to see.
Perfect. So going back to that, like you took the you built this course, you got ShiftRide up and running, and now people are using it. What's next? Like what's next in the vision scheme? Are you trying to raise capital? Are you expanding, hiring? What's going on?
For sure. So the next step like is to figure out like whether the model that we have right now in Toronto, will it work in other provinces? We want to go nationwide like as soon as possible. Like 2022, I would say is when we're ready to like slowly pick up, our growth. And in terms of like kind of launching in multiple areas, because right now like being in one city is nice, but like we want to be able to offer this service in multiple places. So um, uh, and of course, like raising capital is always kind of the back of our head, but I think these two will kind of come hand in hand. So yeah, we're right now we're still working on the product, so everything that's happening is still pretty much MVP. Like it's been a couple months since we launched, so we still take a lot of the bookings through a chat system. So everything is not like fully mm, automated or even close to fully automated. So we need to kind of improve the product, tweak it. But of course, that's like not kind of like a 1 week or 2 week thing. It will always be going on, improving the product, but get it to a certain level that we can comfortably launch it in other places, I would say would be kind of the next step. And then figure out a way to actually get into those provinces and then eventually into the US market. But I think that
Hmm.
will be kind of like next year.
Okay, so you have this trajectory and mapped out and to move forward, right? Like now it's like execution time, right? Like it's one thing to build a company, but another
100%.
thing to execute and develop on a business plan. One of the things I've really recently been able to appreciate, it's like a blog post I read, back in 2013, and then one of a close friend, Tavis Ratnam, just recently reshared it to me. It's by Steve Blank. It's called Search First Execute. Right, and the idea is that startups are not small versions of large companies. That startups really are like experiments. It's like people with lab coats running experiments. It's a laboratory environment. So a startup is essentially a search for a repeatable business model. So you spend a lot of time in a startup looking for ways to find a repeatable business model. And once you catch that and it builds it, then the execution side, you stop searching, you start executing on that business model, right? Repeating it and scaling it and growing it.
100%. Mhm.
And it's almost like two different tasks, right? Like it's one thing to run experiments in a laboratory environment and try to discover something, another thing to execute, or develop. And this is also like a cliff that a lot of entrepreneurs go through to like have to learn the skill to execute now, get away from the building, get away from the tinkering, and okay, now just like scaling this and moving it forward. What kind of mind shift change have you gone through now that now your product is out there? How have you shifted your focus?
Yeah, Robbie, it's so interesting you mentioned that, like that whole, because that comes to my mind every day, like that kind of being in the development mode versus like executing in growth mode, right? And I think like it's it's probably not. On one thing, going back to kind of like timing, I think we always think we're able to grow much faster than we can actually grow, right? And sometimes it's the other way around. Sometimes we end up growing way faster than we think we can, right? And that's a good stage to be, of course. That's when I think product market fit. Once you have a product market fit, then you're in that level where the growth kind of happens, not on its own, of course, but like much easier than when you started, let's say. So I think, yeah, for us, kind of figuring out that balance of like being in development mode versus being in kind of growth mode, it's tough, but I think over time, like that, being able to be a small startup and making small tweaks to the model and seeing what sticks helps, right? So we're still figuring that out. I don't think we're anywhere close to figuring out or having figured out our product market fit. Um, and I don't know, like everyone has a different definition of like what product market fit, but the best one I heard is that you make a product and you're at a level where you don't have enough time to take on the customers that are coming because there's so many customers at the door that yeah you're trying to figure out how to actually onboard them, right? So I think that's a good kind of stage to be, but of course it will take a lot of like marketing efforts and everything to get to that level. And so right now for us, it's figuring out how do we market to get to that growth level, right? So run experiments, run marketing experiments, see who our target customers even are, right? So I mean, right now we have some idea of like who these people are who are coming in, let's say booking cars on a weekly basis, but will that be kind of the target market that we're going for, that we're actually like advertising for? So yeah, it's still a learning curve. Like we don't have it figured out. Um, but every day we try to kind of challenge ourselves with something new, whether it's new uh, product arm, and then experimenting with the marketing side and seeing which one sticks. I think that having that kind of mindset helps a lot, as opposed to sticking to the first like business model you came up with and just trying to grow that, because that could be hard. I mean, it works for some companies, but for others they have to pivot and try to see which one works, which one's more scalable, like and with especially with the capital that you have, right? So if you can go out and raise a lot of capital and grow your idea, that's perfect. But if not, then you got to figure out how to make that business model work in a way where you don't need that much capital, right, to expand it.
Hmm. Yeah. So, well, with thinking in that kind of mentality, and moving forward about strategically building things up, and moving that. How's your advisory team looking like? Have you built up a group of advisors around you? Like, where do you go for for knowledge?
For sure. For so advisory, like right now, a lot of online, a lot of Instagram influencers, Gary V, so I love to turn into like kind of that online, I guess, mode of looking for like advice and everything. I don't have anyone that I would call a mentor. But of course, like every once in a while, there are people in the industry that I chat with, who've either done this before or done something similar to this before, and whether it's through like LinkedIn or through networking events that I met them at before, and so I try to catch up with them and kind of share what we're working on. Yeah, that's kind
Yeah.
of like where I kind of get my advice, or yeah.
Cool. No, I love that. That's not an answer I was expecting. Generally when you ask for that, people talk about advisory boards or trying to build an advisory board, stuff like that. But the fact that your mind immediately went to Gary Vee and like Instagram influencers, that's really interesting because you know what? I think like the influencer market, especially in that kind of sense, like especially from like business leaders to like the entrepreneurship leaders to even like inspirational, just motivational speakers, right? I think it's so important to surround yourself with an entrepreneur because like the mindset matters, right? The mind state that you're in, and by watching these influences, one of the main things I realized is that not only are you grasping truth or like you're taking something out from what they say, but like you're also glimpsing into their mind, like how they think about the world, how they view things, right? And that's
100%.
just as important, right? When
Yeah.
like listen to Gary Vee talk a little bit, more than like the aggressive bravado and like the the straight in your face like yelling at you
Yeah.
inspiration, right? Is like this worldview of looking at things, right, as collectibles, as people's, as as these blocks that like make like these calculable decisions, and how you can work within that, and like how your passion should like how should flow through your capital, and like like there's different ways. And then you turn around and you like listen to you know who else, like the guy from Shark Tank,
Mark Cuban
uh Mark
or
Cuban, or
Kevin
even
O'Leary.
Kevin O'Leary, right?
Yeah.
Like you switch to someone like that, and you see a completely different worldview,
Oh yeah.
right? And being able to like, I think like more than like, I think mentorship is like an overblown term nowadays. Like it's like everyone else is like trying to find a mentor, but like what you really want is like access to mind states, right? Like different sets of
100%.
minds, like mind, like how they see the world, or like the mind views of how they make decisions, because it gives you a different framework from you to think, or like how you should think about, right? Like you see the winners and you work around that. What I love about online is that there's this idea that you are your five friends, the people you spend most of your time with is who you become. But if you can spend a larger online time, through online time, you can kind of hack this, right? By like following the right people, or get by like creating like your social environment around like certain points of influence. You can hack your own personality, your mind, your own self conscious towards that kind of mindset, if you if you're very calculated like that.
100%. Yeah, I think like social media is like anything else. You can like a TV, kind of a TV, right? You can choose the right channels and learn something, or you can just kind of like browse on and see, vacation photos, which, you still got to do a bit of both. It's not like one or the other. But what I'm saying is that like the online like influencer kind of model, I think works really well. And um, just kind of tuning in and let's say you're not having a great day in your startup and you watch a couple of those videos, it kind of helps you get through it and
Absolutely.
maybe even find new methods of making something work. Um, and I don't know, I'm not like a huge like motivational video type of person. I used to be, but because it's not everything, right? So it's not like you can watch one video and then go execute, right? So it
Yeah.
doesn't work the same way, but at least kind of filling your mind with those kind of content, with that type of content. At least if you don't learn something new, you're in a positive mindset of wanting to go out and do something about it, right? So
Mm,
yeah, I think it's one of those things that still a lot of people don't turn to, but they should look at it and try it out, even if it's through YouTube, if it's through Instagram or wherever, right? So and TikTok's a great one too. There's so many educational videos there that I every time I just check it, I'm like, I can't believe it. So
hmm. So like going back to that idea, right? Like like I've been following this idea like of social commerce, right? Like everything's becoming more social and all about micro communities, right? Like
yeah,
people want to buy from people. Like there was a great meme that showed like more people follow Bill Gates than Microsoft on LinkedIn. More people follow Jeff Bezos than Amazon. And the idea behind it being like people buy from people, right?
yeah,
Like why does Tesla worth so much where there's barely any marketing? Elon Musk, right? Like the
right,
brand names behind the entrepreneur behind the business makes it as like builds like develops like a cult like a following almost, right? Like we live in an environment where like we
100%.
idolize like successful entrepreneurship, and that comes from entrepreneurs, but also from other people who just want to see the winners come out of it. And I think there's an opportunity to social media to develop our own as entrepreneurs, just like creators out there, like comedians or sketch makers or art, like visual artists, just like they develop like a community around themselves through their art. I think there's an opportunity for entrepreneurs to develop a community around themselves around their business, right? Not just kind of customers buying the stuff, but just seeing how it's made and run from the back end, just cheerleading you on. They want to be people want to be part of things, but part of movements, right? Is this something you think
100%.
about, or like you frame in?
Yeah, I try like I mean, it's interesting you said that. I think like for the like especially for the courses, the course that I made like online, I put together kind of an Instagram page and started posting there like content. And it's interesting to see a lot of my students kind of tune in and follow it over there, or even on YouTube, just to kind of like follow along after the course and see what happens. I think it's the same thing for like any business, right? So they want to see kind of like they want to learn more about the person behind the brand or the product, and see what they're all about and what else can they learn from them. I think, yeah, it's there's a lot over there that's going on, and you either have the opportunity, like there's a lot of great companies that we don't know the people behind them, right? Because they don't have that kind of, I guess, uh, following on social media, or even they're not that involved themselves, right? So which makes sense, right? So it's not for everyone. It's pretty hard to, and I mean, like, you have a podcast, so it's hard to put out content, day in and day out, right? So and even for like the design course that I'm working on, like, when I put together kind of content to post on Instagram, it takes a lot of time to create that content, put it up, make sure it delivers value. So it's a lot of work. So when entrepreneurs do that and share the process along the way,
Mm.
share those kind of steps and every day and the behind the scenes, as you're saying, I think like there's lots of value. There's more value than the sometimes the product that people buy from them. So just to see kind of like what it takes to you know sit behind the Tesla, what it takes.
Mm.
Yeah.
One of my favorite quote unquote influencers right now is Naval Ravikant, the co-founder of AngelList. He's
Okay.
kind of got a cult-like following on Clubhouse now, and on Twitter, but he's
Interesting.
becoming known like the oracle of tech, just because of how simply explains ideas, like moral, almost like moral philosophies around technology and innovation and life, from a point of like from an entrepreneurial point, like a framework, but like very simple, like very condensed, minimalistic thoughts, right? And he has like a whole following on Twitter. Like his tweets and some of his sayings have been condensed into something called Navalisms, right? And there's literally there's aggregators out there who are like bring this together and calling it Navalisms, and like the different things he's talked about, and then adding their point of reference to it, explaining the Navalisms, right? So it's really interesting to see how these communities kind of develop. But one of the things that I really took away from Naval that really spoke to me is the idea of leverage, right? So in the old world, leverage came from two forms: capital and labor. If you control labor, if you have capital control, you can you have leverage to solve any kind of problem. You solve problems, you get paid by the market for the problems you solve, right? Nowadays, because of the internet, right, you get a new form of leverage. So the old forms of leverage, capital and labor, are permission leverage. Someone has to give it to you. You'd ask for someone's permission, someone to come and work for you, or you had to pay someone to come work for you. You had to, you had to get permission from that. And the same thing about capital, right? Someone has to give you capital, either through customers or through investors that you convince to fund your project. But now, in the era of the internet, you have two new forms of leverage, and they're permissionless, meaning you don't need anyone's permission to do that. And their types
Okay.
is code and media, right? So you don't need anyone's kind of permission to develop some code, learn code, but to build something, build a product just like ShiftRide and launch it out. And you're developing this entity that can go, you can build and grow, develop and solve problems in the world. And the bigger the solution it solves, the problems it solves, the more rewards you get out of it, the more capital you get out of it, right? But
Yeah.
the secondary one is what I'm really interested in, is media leverage, right? Because you can create as much media content as much as you want, because now everything's frictionless. You have these HD devices, we have these kind of things, super easy and efficient to create media, right? You can create these elements just like pieces of code, or a code project out there on its own, working and developing and growing on behalf of you. Media is kind of the same thing. You develop and you publish the asset, and it lives on, right?
Yeah.
Look at Joe Rogan, right? Like $100 million acquisition by Spotify for his network,
Okay.
and probably made another $100 million independently, running his companies under his brand and umbrella of his podcast, right? Like really inspired that kind of thinking, right? So these two new types of permissionless leverage, I think that's what's really sparking a lot of entrepreneurial action right now. I mean, startups, the main reason startups running is software is eating the world, and if you can create code, you're there. But there's also these points of there's media leverage. If you can capture attention in the ever shortening attention graph that people have, right? Like that's it, right? Attention from
100%.
thousands of people, millions of people, it's very valuable, right?
For
And
sure.
within all that is data, right? Like being able to
Hmm.
capture and learn data to learn from. So I think we're moving into like a really interesting world, post pandemic, where everyone's now suddenly used to being virtual and being, working anonymously and like, virtually and, without any kind of real kind of physical interactions. How can we evolve as companies? Would you hire people that are across the world that you'll probably never meet? And would you trust them to run ShiftRide? What's your mindset there?
For sure. I think like yeah, you touched on a lot of cool stuff there. I mean like the past year I think we've seen like or at least I've seen like way more people become influencers and become kind of these online you know characters that people follow, through all these platforms. There's so many now, right? TikTok, Instagram, and all of that, right? So I think they made it easier where like with the media, you don't even before like you used to need some sort of professional camera or some sort of professional equipment, but now with like just an iPhone, you can go and become a kind of an influencer, and as long as you put some content out there that people like, the same thing as a product, right? If you code something that people like to use, you're set. You don't really need much capital or labor there. So I think yeah, definitely those are we'll see like that pick up way more I think in the future, and it won't be as important to let's say be have millions of dollars in funding to start a company, right? So um, I think that transition is going to be interesting to see and hopefully help more people become entrepreneurs and at least explore it, right? So to see if it's their thing. And yeah, but going back to kind of your question, like I guess like hiring like and being fully remote. It's a hard mindset to develop to, especially like for me, like I definitely like that face-to-face connection a lot more. But of course, like as like a lot of companies are moving towards that direction, I think like eventually we'll have to um, develop that ability to be able to connect virtually and trust people virtually and um, see where they take things. And I don't think like it's a huge difference, as long as you can communicate with that person, um, and with so many tools now that usually that's not a huge deal. You take a chance, but someone either works out or it doesn't. So I think, yeah, I think I will definitely want to try it out, and if it's the right person, why not? I think, especially like if you want to expand to other provinces or like for us other areas, and we don't like whereas before we had this mindset of having to be there physically ourselves. Now with this new kind of remote working, we can totally launch in new cities and have people in those cities run shift, right? Let's say within that city or within that area without us having to be present there, right? So it will give us a lot of leverage for sure. Like once we pick it up and we get more comfortable with it, I think definitely the first few hires are going to be like more challenging, and you'd need warmer leads than someone, let's say, randomly online that you find, unless you of course connect with that person a lot. But other than that, I think like that's where we'll see like most companies like or many companies, especially like online ones, shift towards, right? So
Hmm.
if there's one thing we really learned, kind of going back to kind of one of the learnings that we had over the past, little while, and let's say over the past year, it's that if you're an online business, you're usually pretty set through these challenging times. So like one thing we learned is that like we had a lot of pieces that are very physical, very like in person. At some point, like when we just launched Shift, right, we were like physically visiting each car, making sure they're in a good condition, they're clean, and all of that. And then eventually, we kind of moved towards this mindset of, can we completely outsource that to the car owner themselves and have them take care of this, and even give them a little bit more money if that helps, right? So, or increase their take. To see if that helps. And eventually, like it ended up becoming much easier to manage, right? So we eventually became pretty much online. We didn't have to be in Waterloo. We could be in Toronto and manage cars in Waterloo from here. So yeah, definitely having that mindset as of either hiring remotely or even operating your business remotely. I think it's a good mindset to have. If your business is online, right? If it's still like a store physically somewhere, then that's definitely probably not gonna work. But yeah, I think that's kind of my take on that.
Yeah. So, I mean, going back to this permission leverage, right? And these topics of, following Gary Vee and things like that. How do you get the messaging out? Like, are you focused more on the code aspect of it? Write really good code, write really good product, build really good product, and it'll sell itself, or are you still in the mode of like even great ideas have to be sold? And how are you getting this out to consumers?
100%. Like every time I think about this myself too, I always, this quote comes to my mind that if a tree falls in the middle of the forest and no one hears it, did it really happen, right? So it's the same thing with a product. If you code a beautiful product and put it together and you focus solely on that, and you don't get customers for it, did it really make an impact, right? So for us, I think like the balance is really important, and sometimes we forget. Like we have to remind ourselves, to not go too deep into the product end, or sometimes to not go too deep into just marketing what we have and it doesn't fully work right yet. So I think that they have to go hand in hand, right? So that's why we, every once in a while, my co-founder and I kind of come out of this kind of fully into the product mode and then go a little bit more into the marketing mode. Try to market what we made. If it needs tweaks, if it has bugs, we'll go back and fix those. But we try not to go deep into one or the other, right? So you need both to go hand in hand, right? So you need to market the product that you built and get those initial users. And especially the early on, it's important to talk to your users, see if this is the product they're even looking for. What do they want improved? Sometimes the features that we have in our heads as like entrepreneurs or programmers is not even close to what your customers are thinking, right? So it's always good to, whether it's sending out surveys or just sitting, virtually having a chat with your customers, the early ones always help. So, yeah.
Hmm. Yeah. So one of the things I'm really intrigued about is like the different levels of innovation that is required, right? Both in frameworks of within a company and in society, right? So there's sustainable innovation, which is the incremental innovations you do to keep up with things, right? So like the car engine having to improve to keep up with the mileage problem, right? Like as
Yeah.
gasoline prices gets more expensive, you make the cars more efficient. It makes things do that. So that innovation is sustaining the product. And second level order things is is transformative innovation, right? Ones that
Mhm.
transform something into something else, right? So almost like hybrid vehicles, right? So a hybrid vehicle can transform. It's a transformative product because it allows for like more savings, but it requires like a change in how you do things. Right? You're adding more complexity into the product and differentiating it, right? But then the third one is disruptive innovation. It's the hardest thing to do. You're completely changing the market by creating a new one. So like EV vehicles, like electric vehicles, right? Completely change the entire infrastructure. No more gas.
Mhm.
You need now electricity, a whole new fuel source, right? It needs to be housed different, completely different mechanics, different way of maintaining them and monitoring them. Like everything about them kind of shifts and changes, and the capabilities kind of change with it. But with that disruptive market, a new market, you also have these infractions, right? The ability to have autonomous driving installed to it, the ability to provide like updates as software updates, maintenance of software updates, right? Having more informatics involved, like all these disruptions kind of increase it and move it up along, right? How do you frame your ideas, right? Whether it be ShiftRide in general or launching product launches, right? Do you think of them in these kind of frameworks of like what parts of this is going to be sustaining, what parts is going to be disruptive, what parts of this is transformational, like what can I do, what can I do, like how do you frame like your ideas?
That's a great question, to be honest. Like it's sometimes like we don't even realize that we're going through those stages, but we are, right? So like I mean like um, and sometimes we have to kind of make sure that we're on the same page of the customer, right? Because sometimes we could be talking about putting out marketing content for a product that's either too good to be true or too futuristic or too ahead of its time, right? And so customers don't sometimes buy into that, right? Especially um, uh, like early on when you're trying to convince people, let's say a subscription model is better than a lease. So what we try to do is definitely show that transformational model and see kind of how, here's what we have today and here's what you could have and how it's a step better than what you have. So I think that's important to show customers, as opposed to kind of try to be very, very disruptive and say like we're making something that's like really exceptional, you're gonna love it. And so I think, I mean, you still want to do a bit of both, right? Like for example, like Tesla, they come out and say we're making this cool truck, right? And at the same time, they're working on their cars and they still launch the cars and make small feature updates, right? So
Mm-hmm.
I don't think there's a like like at any point you can't be working on all of them. You can present the future to the customers, but at the same time, you still got to make those small transformational kind of tweaks to your products, and show your customers that you care about their feedback. So and especially when it comes to disruption, the hardest part is that you can't ask people what they want us to dis or the company to disrupt, right? So when it comes to disruptive ideas or disruptive like products that you want to make, that's when I think just launching what you think will be something that the market wants, it helps, right? Whereas, like for example, the more of the transformational product launches, like that's more important that you talk to your customer and see if that's something that they want, or that feature that you're coding is something that they actually want. And I think like um, Steve Jobs had a code, related to this, and it's I don't know exactly how it goes, but it's somewhere along the lines of you can't ask your customers, what they want, because they don't know what they want, right? So like, and that's totally true. Like when it comes to future kind of innovative products, right? And it's totally okay. Even big companies make products that people don't want, and then they eventually like say, okay, this was a failure. They don't say it, but people, find out, at some point that this is not something that works. Like even Apple does it on a daily basis. They were gonna, for the longest time, launch, for example, like these wireless chargers, and they presented it in their keynotes, and then ended up not happening. Um, or some products they even launch and ended up not working out, right? So I think as long as you have a mix between the three models, I think you're set. But sometimes it's hard. Some companies are working on very disruptive ideas that, especially a lot of the, let's say, biomed companies that, or biotech companies that have products that might, only work in 5 to 10 years, right? So for those types of companies, it could be hard to show something that's kind of like in the present moment, what they can give customers. So it can definitely be challenging, but mhm.
Yeah, I think you summarized that really well. I think Steve Jobs is paraphrasing Henry Ford of that, right? Like, if
Yes,
Henry Ford is saying, yeah, Henry Ford is saying, like, if I ask people what they wanted, they say a faster horse. But he had to
exactly.
go out and build the car for them to understand what was possible. And funny enough, one of the things Henry Ford said was like, every single component of the cars that he built, he never invented. It was already existing in the marketplace. All he did
Exactly.
was take existing things and put it together in a new way to develop this thing and show people, hey, this is what's possible. And he had to take that leap to get it done. And then, and not even that, like he had to, develop processes, sell them, and get it out to market, and develop an industry around this, right? Disruptive innovation is one of the hardest things to do, because you're making a market, but if you can do it, it's one of the most rewarding things. And even though
Yes.
Henry, we can look at the winners. There's been tons of failures. So many companies that were way beyond their time, too early, not enough, right? Like not enough support is there, and they fizzled out. But you never know until you try, right? And it takes the
Yeah,
craziness of entrepreneurs to make that try and attempt. So, Nima, man, on that note, kudos to you and now your team on developing this and getting to where you are.
yeah,
Looking forward to seeing more of what comes out of this and more of your growth. Thank you again for coming on again and updating us on your story. But looking forward to future updates as well.
for sure. Robbie, thank you so much for having me. It was great to chat with you again, and in a different format, but it's always great to catch up. So, yeah, hopefully next time it will be at your new studio,
Yeah,
and maybe at a networking event. We'll see. Yeah,
yeah, absolutely. So stick around. We'll do a quick debrief. But for everyone who
sounds
tuned
good.
in, thank you. And this has been Nima from ShiftRide. Check them out.